The building always felt cold in the mornings, but on the day they summoned me, the temperature carried a different weight. The hallway leading toward the HR suite felt like a corridor in a government facility, sterile and strategically quiet, the kind of quiet engineered to influence a person before they ever stepped inside the room. The lights were too bright. The smell of disinfectant was sharp enough to sting my throat. The tile beneath my feet clicked with each step, echoing in a way that made my pulse feel louder than it should have. When I pushed open the glass door, the atmosphere inside the HR chamber shifted the air around me like a boundary line. Ms. Lucinda Baylor sat at the center of the table, framed by frosted windows that only allowed blurred silhouettes of the hallway outside. She wore a navy blazer with a freshly pressed collar, dark lipstick, and an expression that attempted to mimic empathy but failed to hide an underlying current of dread. Her hands rested on a thick beige folder placed very deliberately in front of her. Beside her sat corporate counsel, Mr. Hosea Del Mar, a severe man whose glasses always reflected conference lights in a way that obscured his eyes. Eyes hidden meant emotions concealed. He preferred it that way. He had the posture of someone who believed he had already solved a problem and now waited merely for others to recognize his brilliance. But the third presence was the one who anchored the entire scene with a gravity that unsettled the walls themselves. Through the glass panel on the right, standing just close enough to be seen but far enough to avoid implication, was Baron Lashley, the newly crowned Vice President of Strategic Infrastructure. Tall, slender, immaculate in a charcoal suit that hugged his form like it had been sewn directly onto his body. One hand rested in his pocket, while the other held a notebook he did not open. He looked at me with the controlled stare of a man who had trained himself to never blink first. His jaw was sharp, his expression unreadable, but I sensed triumph rippling beneath his stillness like heat waves rising from asphalt. Baron was not sitting in the room because he did not need to. He wanted to watch the moment unfold from a safe shadow, the way architects of demolition sometimes stood at a distance from a condemned building, savoring the quiet seconds before the collapse. Ms. Baylor gestured toward a chair. "Please have a seat, Miss Imani Rhodes." Her voice was even, almost soothing, but it carried an undercurrent of tension that suggested she was preparing for an unpredictable outcome. The type of outcome corporate protocols never fully accounted for. I sat. I remained still. My hands rested on the table with a calmness that did not feel entirely like my own. Something colder had settled into my body, something precise. It allowed me to see everything in the room with unusual clarity. The way Ms. Baylor hesitated before opening her folder, the slight tremor in Mr. Delmar's left hand, the way Baron's reflection in the glass carried a faint, self-satisfied tilt of his chin. Ms. Baylor inhaled. "Ms. Rhodes, we have received credible reports that you have been engaging in undisclosed interactions with outside groups that fall under direct competitive risk categories." Her words were carefully chosen, too carefully, as if she had rehearsed them the night before. Perhaps she had practiced in her mirror, tightening her jaw to match the gravity of her script. Her tone attempted calm, but it failed to mask the quiet anticipation that lingered beneath. I blinked once, slowly, not a flinch, not a gasp, not a flicker of fear. Silence spread between us, a slow-moving fog that suffocated the false authority in the room. Mr. Delmar interlocked his fingers. "Do you have a statement in response to these findings?" he asked, voice crisp and metallic, devoid of warmth. I gave him a soft smile, not cheerful, not mocking, just the type of smile one offers before closing a door that no longer leads anywhere meaningful. "No," I said. The single word cut through the room like a blade dragged across marble. They expected panic. They expected pleading. They expected the emotional unraveling that often accompanied professional termination. Instead, they received a calm so unnatural it made them shift in their seats. Ms. Baylor cleared her throat. Your badge will be deactivated. Security will escort you to the lobby. Your belongings will be mailed to your home address. Your system access will be revoked within the hour. Her words sounded routine, but her eyes trembled slightly at the edges, as if uncertain whether the scene was unfolding as it should. Barron's reflection remained motionless. I signed the documents they presented. My signature flowed across the paper without resistance. Every pen stroke felt like the completion of a ritual I had been anticipating for far longer than they suspected. When I finished, I slid the pen across the table, and I stood. The air shifted again. Something subtle. Barron's posture tightened when he saw how composed I was, as though his victory had begun to dissolve before he fully tasted it. His eyes narrowed a fraction, barely perceptible, but I noticed. I walked past the glass wall without looking in his direction, not even a flicker. But I felt his gaze trail after me, sharp as a knife, searching for a sign of fear that did not exist. Security arrived. A man named Quentin who had been working in the building for years. He did not speak as he walked me to the elevator, and I appreciated the silence. The doors closed, sealing me inside a steel box that hummed with fluorescent light. Each floor we passed tightened the coil in my chest not with panic, but with awareness. Awareness that something irreversible had begun. As the elevator descended, the soft chimes felt strangely ominous. Floor 20, 17, 12, 7, 3. Ground level. By the time the doors slid open, a strange calmness enveloped me. Outside, the sunlight collided with the reflective surfaces of the building in harsh, blinding streaks. The wind pressed against my jacket. The city breathed around me with mechanical rhythm. I walked to my car. Not hurried, not shaken. The movements were steady, anchored by a purpose that stretched beyond the moment. When I sat behind the wheel, I did not cry. My heartbeat did not spike. My breath did not hitch. Instead, I unlocked my phone with deliberate precision. I scrolled through encrypted contacts until the symbol appeared. A single black circle. I tapped it. A voice answered with silence. It begins, I said. The line ended. No confirmation. No exchange. That was the agreement from the beginning. When the trigger phrase was spoken, everything would move into place. Barron believed he had secured a decisive victory. What he had actually done was loosen the restraints around a machine I had been assembling piece by piece, year after year. A machine designed to operate with absolute precision. The moment he orchestrated my removal, he activated it. The drive away from the building stretched out like a long corridor with no doors, only forward movement and an expanding silence that wrapped itself around me. The city moved as it always did. Horns, pedestrians, delivery trucks, muffled music from passing cars, but everything felt slightly out of sync, as if the world had shifted by a fraction of a degree, and only I could sense the imbalance. I reached a red light. The crosswalk signal blinked in a steady rhythm that felt like the slow pulse of something watching. The buildings around me stood tall, indifferent, unaware of the storm quietly taking shape. Yet the moment felt heavier than it should have, a pressure behind my ribs, not panic, but anticipation. The kind of anticipation that comes from long-held knowledge that the ground beneath a structure is beginning to crack, and soon the entire foundation will show its fractures. Barron Lashley had been working for months to erode my footing in that company. I saw it in the subtle changes, the quiet removals from critical meetings, the sudden rerouting of clients to his own initiatives, the rebranding of old projects under his direction, the silent elimination of my name from documentation that I authored. It was all orchestrated with a precision that revealed not only ambition, but fear. Fear of the threat I posed, fear of the influence I had gained, fear of the insights I had cultivated. People like Barron wrapped their insecurities in tailored suits and strategic vocabulary. They masked incompetence with confidence, buried uncertainty under corporate jargon, and disguised fear as dominance. But insecurity always seeped through the cracks of their carefully constructed facades. And Barron's insecurity was a deep well, darker than most realized. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator gently, merging into traffic with ease. A calmness settled over my shoulders, heavy but grounding. It was the calmness that comes when a plan shifts from theoretical to active, when pieces begin to align. I drove past the industrial district, rows of warehouses that stretched toward the horizon like abandoned fortresses. As I approached the edge of the city, a familiar unease rose from memory. The unease was not fear, it was memory, a reminder of how this story truly began. Because 3 weeks before the HR ambush, the edges of my world had already started to mutate. It began on a Thursday morning when my division gathered for a strategy review. The tension in the room that day had been palpable, a vibration beneath the surface that only the people who were paying attention would have felt. I had walked in with a presentation I had crafted over months, a detailed analysis of system vulnerabilities, and an intricate plan for mitigating risk exposure while optimizing efficiency. It was a proposal designed to strengthen the organization, to protect it from impending instability within the industry, and to expand its influence with partners who valued long-term vision. The room was filled with the usual mix of senior leaders and mid-level analysts. Most of them respected my work. Some even admired it. But respect meant nothing when a person like Barron entered the equation. His presence turned every room into a silent battlefield. People lowered their voices. They watched his reactions before offering their own thoughts. They waited for his approval like children waiting for grades. That day, I presented with clarity, conviction, and confidence. I spoke through data models, risk projections, new implementation structures, and streamlined workflows. I saw heads nodding, pens taking notes, analysts exchanging glances that hinted at genuine interest. Then everything shifted when I reached the final slide. Barron leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and stared at me with an expression that felt like a blade pressed lightly against skin. "Imani," he said slowly, "this strategy does not align with the direction we are taking. It is far too complex for rollout. It lacks flexibility." He said the words too quickly, too smoothly, without any real analysis. He had not read the full proposal. He had not examined the data. He had not sought clarity. He dismissed it simply because it came from me. The room fell silent. The CEO glanced at Barron with the kind of careful neutrality that meant he had already chosen a side. The others looked down at their notes, unwilling to challenge the new power dynamic. I recognized that moment for what it was, a kill order disguised as feedback. After the meeting, everything happened swiftly. Invitations vanished. Leadership channels suddenly shifted direction. Several of my direct reports were reassigned to Barron's teams under new titles meant to disguise the displacement. Communications from major clients began rerouting away from me without explanation. The fractures were subtle at first, but they grew deeper with each passing day. I spent nights staring at the screens in my home office, reading through policy documents and system pathways. I reviewed architecture frameworks I had authored years earlier. I revisited contract archives, redlined notes, and dormant innovation logs. My mind traced back through every initiative I had built, every piece of intellectual scaffolding they had depended on for stability. I saw the warning signs in sharp detail. They were reusing my frameworks without acknowledgement. They were repurposing my conceptual structures to align with Barron's new initiatives. They were building crumbling towers on foundations I had laid. But I also saw something else. A clause buried deep within the contract labyrinth. A clause forgotten by most. Overlooked by many. A clause I helped draft in a period when the company believed in accountability. Clause 51, F.2. ownership reversion of non-implemented innovation portfolios. Unused systems revert to the originator after 18 months of inactivity. It had been 20 months since they shelved my project, and 15 days since I discovered the clause. I stared at the documentation for hours that night, adjusting my glasses and running my finger along the signature lines I recognized as my own. The clause had been designed to protect creators from internal stagnation. It had been buried in legal text to safeguard intellectual development. They did not remember it, but I did. The next day, I began reaching out. Quietly, strategically. A select group of former colleagues, industry veterans, and innovators who had left the company during the restructuring that preceded Barron's installation. People who valued integrity and foresight. People who respected strategy grounded in logic rather than vanity. People who remembered my capabilities. A name surfaced repeatedly: Obsidian Systems Collective, a discrete organization working in the shadows of the industry, designing infrastructure solutions with surgical precision. Their work was whispered about in certain circles, admired by analysts who paid attention, feared by companies that recognized their disruptive potential. They had been watching developments in my former company for months, and they had noticed me. The first meeting occurred in a quiet space guarded by layers of NDAS, encrypted locks, and soundproof panels. No corporate posters, no sanitized company slogans, only a glowing whiteboard, humming servers, and project leads who regarded the world through sharp, analytical eyes. Their director, a composed woman named Dr. Kalia Strickland, sat across from me. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "We know what you built," she said. "We know what they discarded. And we know what you can help us create." She slid a small folder across the table. Inside was a blueprint, not of a product, of a future. A future designed with the kind of precision that could destabilize any organization that underestimated its architects. The first blueprint was only the beginning, because Obsidian Systems did not want my old project. They wanted what lay beneath it: the architecture of my mind, the structure of my experience, the strategic patterns they had glimpsed but never fully understood. I felt something shift inside my chest, a slow awakening of a part of myself that had been smothered in that company for far too long. And I realized something then, something that deepened the darkness that now followed every step I took. Barron had not merely pushed me out, he had released me. He had freed me from a system that feared my capabilities more than it valued them. As I drove further from the building that morning, the city slipped away behind me. Concrete gave way to open roads. The hum of traffic softened. The sky stretched wider. A calm certainty settled into my bones. Everything had already begun. The next stage was unfolding. The fuse had been lit, and the structure Barron believed he controlled would soon face a reckoning shaped by the very person he attempted to erase. Night arrived early the week after my termination, as if the sky understood that darkness needed additional time to settle itself across the city. The streets were quieter than usual, and even the neon lights that spilled across the windows of passing buildings seemed subdued, softened, as though dimmed by an unseen hand. In the silence of my home office, I watched the glow from my monitor illuminate the walls, highlighting the stacks of notes, the folders, the binders filled with diagrams and archived proposals. Shadows stretched long across the floor, twisting at the edges like restless specters. Obsidian Systems Collective had already integrated me into their network by then. Not loudly, not publicly, but with the kind of deliberate precision that made it clear they understood the stakes of my involvement. Their headquarters was hidden within an unmarked building in the industrial corridor. Tall, matte black, with tinted windows and an entry system that scanned both retinal patterns and biometric metrics. Their environment felt engineered for anonymity. Inside that building, their teams worked in near monastic silence. Programmers moved between glass chambers filled with data projections. Analysts scribbled equations onto transparent boards. Strategists like me engaged in long sessions regarding vulnerabilities, market manipulation patterns, and shifts in corporate behavior that could signal incoming fractures. Dr. Kalia Strickland oversaw everything with solemn authority. Her presence carried weight, not because of a title, but because of the certainty in her gaze. A certainty that spoke of truths she discovered long before the world was willing to acknowledge them. She moved with the silence of someone accustomed to working in shadows, someone wise enough to avoid the spotlight at all costs. It was during my second week collaborating with Obsidian that Dr. Strickland revealed the truth about why they had been watching my former employer for more than a year. "We identified structural instability in their infrastructure 6 months ago," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "The instability has gotten progressively worse." I opened the folder. Diagrams, risk projections, corrupted data paths, failed security audits, incomplete patch cycles, internal warnings that had been ignored, misaligned budgets. All of it painted a picture of a company that had been slowly eroding from the inside, covered by glossy presentations curated by people like Barron, who believed that aesthetic confidence was more important than structural stability. These patterns accelerated when Baron Lashley began restructuring the strategic divisions, Dr. Strickland continued. He has been repurposing frameworks without understanding their internal mechanics. He has been redirecting funds without appropriate checks. And he has been pressuring analysts to manipulate metrics to maintain the illusion of stability. I studied the documents with a calm expression, but my breath stirred the air with subtle changes. These were not trivial findings. They were symptoms of a deeper disease. "They replaced oversight with performance theater," Dr. Strickland said. "You were the last stabilizing factor in that environment. When he isolated you, the structure lost its final anchor." She leaned back in her chair, hands folded, studying me with eyes that felt as sharp as instruments used to cut through bone. "You understand this better than anyone. If a system is placed under pressure on one side without balance on the other, collapse is not a possibility. It is a guarantee." Her words settled into my chest like stones sinking into deep water. She adjusted her glasses. "When Baron orchestrated your removal, he accelerated the timeline. The system is deteriorating, and your former employer is unaware of how close they are to catastrophic failure." I felt neither satisfaction nor sorrow. Only clarity. Clarity so stark, it cast long shadows across everything I thought I understood about the organization that had consumed 14 years of my life. Obsidian Systems had already started working on an independent infrastructure that would offer a stronger alternative for organizations seeking stability. A network architecture built on resilience, transparency, and accountability. A sharp contrast to the brittle frameworks my former employer operated under. They wanted me to help build that alternative, not because they needed the work, because they needed the mind behind it. Each day, I worked through late hours, submerged in diagrams, contracts, regulations, and systems architecture. I slept very little. My thoughts became sharper in the quiet. Calculation replaced sentimentality. Strategy replaced memory. The past became context. The future became precision. But even as I immersed myself in new frameworks, I was aware of the echoes unfolding in my old workplace, because within days of my departure, whispers began. At first, they were small. A developer named Latrice messaged me through an encrypted channel. A single sentence. "Something is wrong." Then a systems analyst reached out. "Our nodes are unstable since you left." Then a project manager wrote, "Baron is panicking quietly, which is worse than panicking loudly." These messages arrived at irregular intervals, but they all carried the same undertone: fear, uncertainty, a sense that something had begun to unravel. The turning point arrived when a former colleague named Jerome contacted me. He had never been one for dramatics, and he spoke with measured words even in crisis. He was an expert in interpreting silence. He understood the invisible machinery behind corporate breakdown. His message was longer, much longer. He wrote, "Our internal clients are reporting anomalies. Data transfers are misaligned. Barron is forcing teams to push through protocols without verification. He seems terrified of something, but he will not say what. Leadership is moving strangely. People feel watched. They feel watched at their desks, in team meetings, even in the hallways. Something has shifted here, Imani. The air is heavy. It feels like the company is preparing for a crisis they refuse to name." The final line chilled the air around me. It feels like the building is breathing differently. I read his words several times. The room around me grew silent. Even the soft hum of servers sounded distant. Buildings do not breathe, but people who feel trapped inside them do. The walls seemed to tighten around them. The pressure grew. The silence deepened. Barron was losing control of something he never fully understood. He was tampering with systems beyond his capacity. He was pulling levers that were never meant for him to access. And soon, the collapse would not be metaphorical. It would be real, tangible, measurable. Obsidian Systems was preparing for that collapse. They knew the industry would shift once the inevitable occurred. They knew clients would seek stability elsewhere. They knew we needed to be ready before the first public crack emerged. I worked late into the night after Jerome's message. Lines of code blurred into diagrams. Contract lines blurred into warnings. My own heartbeat became a metronome marking the countdown. I took a deep breath and pressed my fingers against my temple. The transformation was beginning. Not just for them. For me. The person they fired no longer existed. The person building frameworks within Obsidian Systems had become something different. More focused, more analytical, more relentless, and far less forgiving. I stood from my desk. The shadows on the wall shifted behind me. The air felt heavy, alive, as though the building itself sensed the approaching shift. I whispered to the empty room, "Barron has no idea what he has awakened." And I was right. Because the next message I received changed everything. 3 nights after Jerome's warning, the air in my home felt different. Not cold, not heavy, just charged, like the faint electrical tension that precedes a storm. I sat at my desk again, the soft hum of nocturnal machinery filling the room. The lights from the city filtered in through the blinds, casting faint ribbons across the floor. It was nearly midnight when my encrypted device buzzed softly. The sound was so subtle that I might have ignored it on any other night. But something in me recognized its importance before I even turned my head. An unknown signature flashed on the screen. Not a colleague, not a friend, not one of Obsidian's internal contacts. This signature belonged to someone deep inside my former company, someone with clearance high enough to access restricted networks. I opened the message. It contained only 3 words. They are spiraling. No name, no identifier. Only that single declaration, sitting on my screen like a whispered confession from a collapsing structure. I stared at it for a long moment. The room around me felt still in a way that made my skin crawl. Buildings do not speak. But sometimes the people trapped inside them speak loud enough that the walls echo their panic. I typed a secure inquiry. Explain. The reply came within seconds, as if the sender had been waiting. Leadership is meeting behind closed doors. They look afraid. Something went wrong with the latest attempt to replicate your framework. Internal systems are faltering. Barron is losing control. My heartbeat remained steady, but something inside me sharpened. The message continued. There was an outage today. Not large, not noticeable to clients, but significant enough to cause internal alarms. Barron insisted it was a minor glitch. It was not minor. The engineers know it is tied to the structure he tried to implement. He overrode protocol again, and now there is talk of a leak they cannot identify. My breath slowed. A leak, not a software breach, not a data spill, a structural leak, a conceptual breach, a failure rooted in the very architecture he stole. Another message arrived. People are afraid to speak openly. The walls feel like they are listening. Even I should not be sending this. I leaned back in my chair. The shadows on the wall seemed to bend with the motion. Another message. Imani, it feels like you left and took the air with you. Nothing holds without tension, and everything is about to collapse. Then the signal went dark. The device powered itself down. A safety mechanism built into the encryption protocol. I exhaled slowly and pressed both hands against the edge of the desk. The collapse had begun. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like rot spreading beneath the surface of hardwood floors. Obsidian Systems had predicted it, but even predictions cannot prepare a person for the moment when data becomes reality. The timeline was accelerating faster than Dr. Strickland anticipated, and Barron was running out of moves. The next morning, Obsidian's war room filled with analysts and project leads. The air was thick with anticipation. Screens displayed cascading columns of data. Indicators blinked red. Reports from various networks showed anomalies that traced directly back to my former company. Dr. Strickland stood at the head of the room, dressed in a dark gray suit, her hair pulled back, her eyes colder than usual. "They are destabilizing faster than expected," she said, her voice low and controlled. There was an internal blackout across several departments. Only 3 minutes, but enough to trigger external suspicion. I studied the data on the screens. The outage originated directly from Barron's new initiative. The initiative built on top of my discarded architectural skeleton. His modifications were reckless. He patched one area by weakening another. He forced scalability onto a framework that was not designed for such rapid expansion without proper reinforcement. He had tampered with a structure he did not understand. As the data scrolled across the screens, I felt an unsettling clarity, the kind of clarity that comes not from triumph, but from recognition. The recognition that a disaster was brewing inside the walls I once helped support. One of the analysts, a quiet man named Siren, spoke without lifting his eyes from the screen. "They are bleeding internal stability. Once external systems detect vulnerabilities, clients will pull away. The market will react." Dr. Strickland nodded. "And they may blame us." That possibility had not escaped me. If Barron believed Obsidian was behind the fractures, he might lash out publicly. He might attempt to frame us as saboteurs. He might leverage his political connections within the board to deflect responsibility. I inhaled slowly. If Barron blames us, he will expose his own negligence, publicly. Dr. Strickland met my gaze. "And that is exactly what we need." Her statement hung in the air. Heavy, deliberate. The plan was taking shape. Not one built on revenge. Not one built on pettiness. Not one fueled by rage. This was strategy. Dark, precise strategy. To dismantle an unstable empire, one must let the structure reveal its own fractures. I stepped closer to the table, observing more data feeds. "Has Northfield Manufacturing responded to our preliminary proposal?" I asked. Siren nodded. "Yes, they are eager to meet. They have also expressed concern about instability in your former employer's system. They contacted us before we reached out." That was significant. Northfield was one of the largest partners in the region. Their withdrawal would cause catastrophic losses. Dr. Strickland folded her arms. "They fear a collapse. They are looking for a lifeboat." She turned toward me. "You are that lifeboat." The room fell quiet. I thought about my former colleagues, the ones who sent messages tinged with fear. I thought about the analysts who remained trapped under Barron's tightening control. I thought about the building where I invested more than a decade of my life, a building now trembling under the weight of his ignorance. He had torn apart what I built, repurposed my work, buried my name, then tried to erase me entirely. But erasing me meant erasing the knowledge that once kept them stable. Without that knowledge, their system was a maze of corridors with no exits, a labyrinth built on shifting ground, a structure that no longer had a center. Dr. Strickland placed a file on the table. "You need to see this." I opened it. Inside were the results of an audit Obsidian had performed after acquiring access to public compliance documents associated with my former employer. The audit detailed abnormalities, misfiled records, inconsistencies in financial reporting, timestamp manipulations, discrepancies in digital trails. The evidence was overwhelming. Their collapse was not only technical, it was systemic, psychological, ethical. The organization was unraveling in every dimension. Dr. Strickland continued. Once the first client withdraws, the others will follow. And once the board realizes that Barron's leadership is the source of the instability, they will attempt damage control. Siren added quietly, "Damage control may involve weaponizing blame against you." I nodded. "I am aware." A silence spread across the room, cold, measured. Dr. Strickland regarded me with a steady gaze. "Imani, if the board attacks you, you cannot remain silent. If they attempt to discredit you, you must respond." I held her gaze. "I know." "And if it becomes necessary," she continued, "you will need to reveal the clause. Clause 51, F.2. The Dormant Innovation Clause, the clause that gave me intellectual ownership over the framework they attempted to revive. The clause that would destroy any attempt to accuse me of breach. The clause that would expose their negligence publicly." I took a deep breath and closed the folder. The walls around us seemed to pulse with low amber light. The hum of servers deepened. Shadows shifted in the corners as if listening. "The clause stays hidden until they force my hand," I said. Dr. Strickland nodded once. "Then we wait." Not passively, not quietly, but with the patience of strategists who understand that collapse is not always loud. Sometimes collapse is simply a breath, a tremor, a silence that grows heavier by the hour. That night, as I drove home, I saw the skyline of the city lit by faint blue light reflecting off the buildings. The wind pressed against my car, steady and cold. I felt the tension building in the air, stretching like a thin wire pulled too tight. When I reached my apartment, another message waited for me. It came from Jerome. His words were panicked this time. "Something is wrong. Something is very wrong. The executives are preparing a response plan. They mentioned your name, and they look terrified." My blood turned to ice, because that meant the board was meeting, and they were speaking about me in a room filled with fear. I typed only one sentence in response. "Tell me everything." Jerome's response arrived before I even set my phone down, as if the words had been waiting at the edge of his fingertips, trembling, ready to be released. The messages came in fragments at first, frantic, uneven, as though he was typing under duress or while glancing over his shoulder. "They have locked the North Conference wing. Nobody is allowed inside. Security is stationed at every door. This is not normal, Imani." I walked deeper into my apartment, the message glowing in the dim light. The night outside my window was motionless, as though the city itself sensed the shift taking place within those corporate walls. I could almost feel the tremors beneath the surface, faint vibrations that traveled through the unseen threads connecting my former world to my current one. Another message appeared. The board was summoned abruptly. No agenda, no notice. People are whispering. Something about a structural breach inside Barron's initiative, something they cannot trace. They think someone destabilized it. My jaw tightened. Of course they suspected sabotage, because they could not fathom that the instability came from their own recklessness, that the architecture had collapsed under the weight of Barron's ego. that no external enemy was needed, only his incompetence. Jerome sent another message. There was shouting. The CFO demanded an explanation. Barron tried to present a report, but the board stopped him. They asked about you. By name. I stopped walking. The air around me seemed to freeze. They said your departure created a fracture. They believe your absence triggered something. Imani, they do not think you left quietly. They think you are behind the failures. A cold stillness spread through my chest. Not fear, not anger. Something far quieter. A sensation like standing at the edge of a deep cavern and hearing the faintest whisper rise from below. The whisper of inevitability. Barron was desperate. The board was afraid. And fear, when wielded by powerful people, becomes unstable. Jerome continued. I heard one of the executives say your name with a tone I have never heard before, like they were speaking of someone who had become a threat. But it was not hatred. It was caution. They sounded like people who saw something move in the dark and did not know if it was a shadow or a predator. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying my breath. Let them fear me, I whispered into the silence of my apartment. Let them fear what they created. More messages arrived. They are planning to issue a formal notice. Something about internal breach risk. They want to shift blame. They cannot let shareholders know the system is breaking from within. They need a scapegoat. Another message. Barron said your name again. And his voice sounded like someone clinging to the last branch on a falling tree. My heartbeat remained slow, controlled. Barron was unraveling. He had lost control of the narrative, and now he was grasping for the only thing he could weaponize. Me. Jerome's next words tightened every muscle in my body. They mentioned calling legal. They mentioned sending you a formal breach accusation. I think they will contact you by morning. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with cold air. The board was preparing to declare war. But they had forgotten one thing. I wrote the battlefield. I built the structures they depended on. And I understood the weak points they never bothered to reinforce. I typed a message to Jerome. Do not speak about this again. Erase these messages. Stay quiet. He replied instantly. Understood. I powered off the device and walked to the window. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips. The city below looked peaceful, unaware of the quiet violence occurring in corner offices lit by fluorescent lights. In less than 12 hours, the board would send a notice, accusing me, threatening me, attempting to corner me. But they had no idea what was waiting for them. They had no idea that Obsidian Systems had gathered every document, every timestamp, every thread of evidence needed to expose their negligence. They had no idea that Clause 51F.2 sat dormant like a concealed blade waiting for the perfect moment to cut. They had no idea how easily their accusations could be turned against them. I whispered into the darkened window. You should have left me alone. Morning arrived with the faint glow of an overcast sky. A storm was forming, visible only as a distant gray wall moving slowly across the horizon. It felt fitting. Storms have a way of absorbing the tension of hidden truths. At 9:14 a.m., the message arrived. A formal notice, a digital envelope embossed with the company seal. Cold, precise, accusatory. I opened it slowly. The first line was drenched in corporate formality. This is a formal advisory regarding potential violations of your previous employment agreement. My eyes narrowed. They were predictable, desperate, sloppy. The notice accused me of the following: unregulated engagement with competitive entities, unauthorized use of internal frameworks, exposure of confidential structures, manipulation of proprietary systems, all lies, every single line. Then, the final threat. Failure to respond within 72 hours may result in legal escalation. I let the words sit on my screen. I read them twice, then a third time. A quiet laugh escaped me, void of humor. A 72-hour threat, I murmured. This is the tactic of cornered prey. I drafted a response. Not to them, to Dr. Strickland. The moment has arrived. They sent the notice. Her reply came seconds later. Send it to Siren. The team is ready. I forwarded the document into Obsidian's encrypted portal. Within minutes, analysts dissected the language, mapping every false claim. Legal specialists highlighted every clause that countered their accusations. Strategists outlined the consequences if they pushed forward. Then Siren sent me a new packet, a weaponized version of truth. It was not aggressive. It was not loud. It was meticulous. A 12-page counter document drafted in language so precise it could slice through steel. The first page cited the dormant clause, Clause 51, F.2. All unused, unimplemented innovation structures completed beyond the 18-month threshold revert to the originator in full intellectual capacity. Then the proof. My timestamps, my authorship, my revision logs, my signatures, their neglect, Barron's rejection, their documented abandonment. Then the final line on the last page. Any attempts to restrict the originator's rights shall be deemed unlawful, and any usage of said frameworks by the company or its representatives constitutes infringement. I exhaled softly. The document in my hands was not a defense, it was a verdict. For them. I drafted a brief message. 3 lines. No emotion. Your notice has been received. Please review the attached documentation. All further communication will be addressed through appropriate channels. I clicked send. Once. Calmly. Deliberately. Within 30 minutes, an internal explosion occurred inside that company. Because Jerome messaged me again. He wrote only 2 words this time. They know. I stared at the screen. Then he sent another message. The board is panicking. The general counsel looks sick. Barron is pacing. They saw the clause. Imani, they saw what you sent. A third message followed. You have them cornered. My pulse remained slow, steady, measured. I typed back. It has only begun. Jerome responded. Everyone is afraid. A final message arrived a moment later. Barron looks like a man who finally understands the darkness he tried to control. I closed my eyes. Because the moment I had waited for was approaching. The moment when silence breaks. When truth cuts through the soft flesh of their illusions. When the structure they built on fear begins to implode. And that moment arrived faster than I expected. Because at exactly 1:03 p.m., my phone buzzed again. It was not a message. It was a video request from an unknown secure channel. And when I opened it, my former company's entire boardroom stared back at me, terrified. The video feed flickered once before stabilizing. A rectangular grid of faces looked back at me, each one framed by artificial lighting and tight expressions. The boardroom behind them was the same one where I had presented strategy after strategy over the years, but the atmosphere now felt warped. The room that once tried to shrink me now seemed smaller, suffocating its occupants with the weight of their collective fear. I leaned slightly toward my screen. None of them spoke at first. Their silence was thick, trembling, shaped by desperation. They looked at me as though they were staring at the cause of an earthquake, when in truth the tremors began long before I ever stepped away. The CEO, a man named August Keaton with a calm voice engineered for shareholder calls, cleared his throat. But his voice cracked just enough to reveal the truth beneath his cultivated exterior. Ms. Rhodes, he began, we received your document. His pause was weighted. His eyes did not meet mine. His hands fidgeted beneath the frame of the camera, unseen but easy to sense. I said nothing. Silence is a scalpel in the hands of someone who knows how to cut. The general counsel shifted forward. His suit was immaculate, but his composure was unraveling. There appears to be significant conflict between your interpretation of the innovation clause and our internal position. Significant conflict. Legal language for the realization that they were trapped. I allowed the silence to stretch. Their discomfort grew visible, rippling across their faces like the first signs of a fever. Baron Lashley sat at the far end of the table. He looked different. The tailored control was gone. His expensive suit could not disguise the tremor in his jaw or the tightness around his eyes. For the first time since I had met him, Baron looked human. Not powerful, not secure. Human. Frightened in a way he could not hide. The CFO leaned forward. "We want to understand your intentions. This escalation is unnecessary. We are willing to discuss a mutually agreeable resolution." I almost laughed. A mutually agreeable resolution, the words of people who realize their leverage has evaporated. I spoke slowly, my voice even, my tone unshaken. "There is no escalation on my part, only recognition of ownership." The General Counsel swallowed hard. "Ms. Rhodes, your documentation implies that our internal initiatives may be in violation of—" "They are," I interrupted. The silence snapped. Dozens of eyes widened. Even the static in the video feed seemed to freeze. I continued. Clause 51, F.2 is clear. Your company abandoned my innovation architecture. You dismissed it without implementation. 18 months elapsed. I have full rights to its conceptual structure. The CEO shifted uncomfortably. This situation places us at risk. We need to determine a way to mitigate any further complications. There it was. No denial, no counter-argument. Only fear thinly veiled by corporate vocabulary. Before I could respond, a voice cracked through the tension. "Baron." He leaned forward, his face close to the camera, eyes strained with something darker than panic. "You did this," he said quietly. "You destabilized my system. You caused the outages. You sabotaged us." There it was. The accusation he had been waiting to deliver. The last weapon he believed he had. I stared directly into the lens, letting my gaze pass through him like a cold blade. "Your system collapsed because you built it on a foundation you did not understand," I said. "You took what was not yours. You repurposed it incorrectly. And now you are reaping the consequences of your own ignorance." He flinched. A small, involuntary motion. But it revealed everything. The CFO turned toward him sharply. "Baron, is this true? Did you implement the initiative using incomplete models?" Baron's jaw clenched so tightly that for a moment I thought he might break his teeth. "I optimized them." Optimized. A fragile euphemism for tampering. The head of compliance slammed a folder onto the table. The sound echoed through the speakers. "Optimized? You used undocumented structures. You bypassed verification. You falsified readiness metrics. The internal audit shows your fingerprints all over the system failures." Baron inhaled sharply. The CEO finally raised his voice. "Why would you do this without approval?" Baron looked directly at me. Not at the board. Not at his allies. At me. Because the truth had always been personal for him. "She made it impossible to overshadow her work," he said through gritted teeth. "She built everything. Everyone depended on her. I needed—" His voice cracked. "I needed to prove I could exceed her." The room erupted in whispers, gasps, scattered protests. My expression did not change. "How predictable," I said softly. Dr. Strickland had predicted that Baron's ego would eventually expose itself, but I had not expected him to unravel so publicly. The head of legal turned to me, trembling. "Ms. Rhodes, we are prepared to negotiate compensation for your independent rights. We can offer a buyout, equity, non-disclosure stipends." I cut him off. "No." The boardroom froze. "No," I repeated. "You do not have enough to buy what you lost." The CFO's face turned pale. What do you want? Nothing, I said. I simply want you to experience accountability. A dead silence followed. Then I continued, my voice steady. I am not obligated to shield you. Your failures are your own. Your system collapse is your own. And your misuse of my work is already documented. The general counsel swallowed. You are going to sue. No, I said. I will not need to. Their confusion rippled through the screen. I leaned closer. Others will. Before they could respond, another chime sounded. Another face entered the grid. Northfield Manufacturing's Chief Operations Officer. Her voice cut through the tension like a sharpened blade. We have reviewed Obsidian Systems' proposal. We are terminating our partnership with your company effective immediately. The board erupted, voices shouting, panic blooming. She continued, unfazed. Your instability has endangered our infrastructure. Your misuse of proprietary architecture violates our confidence. We have chosen a safer alternative. Then she turned her head toward me. Ms. Rhodes, our teams will speak with you in Obsidian today. I nodded once. The call ended for her, but not for the board. The room fell apart. The CFO shouted at Barron. Legal demanded explanations. The CEO slammed his hand on the table. People moved frantically, gesturing at screens, pointing to documents, scrambling for damage control. Barron sat motionless, a hollow look forming behind his eyes. His empire, built on stolen foundations, was dissolving beneath him. I spoke one final time. You did this to yourselves. Then I ended the call. The silence in my apartment felt vast, still, purposeful. I sat there for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle. Not triumph, not pleasure, just clarity. My phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Strickland. It is done. Come to the office. Your new role awaits. I stood, exhaled slowly, and walked toward the door. By the time I reached Obsidian Systems headquarters, a contract with my name had already been printed and placed on the table. Chief Architect of Strategic Infrastructure. The position fit perfectly, not because of the title, but because of the truth embedded within it. I was no longer a shadow within someone else's framework. I was the architect of my own. I signed my name. A new system began. Thanks for watching the video. If you want more stories like this one, hit the subscribe button and that notification bell. Click on my playlist to watch more videos to get you through the day.